Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Tuesday, September the 16th, 2025, and today we're talking about potentially having too high of organic matter levels, lessons from my milpa patch, and what to do for next year if your garden lost to weeds this year. So let's do it. All right, everyone, welcome to Tilth Tuesday. Every Tuesday this year will be brought to you by our friends at Tilth Soil. If you're looking for compost or propagation mix, check out tilthsoil.com. Link is in the show notes. I hope everyone is having a workable start to your mid-Septembers. First, before we jump in too far, I wanted to give a little shout to Patrick McGovern, who passed away last week. Quoting the Times obituary, Patrick was, quote, an archaeologist who analyzed ancient cauldrons, shards of pottery, and broken bottles to discover and then recreate the alcoholic beverages that intoxicated prehistoric civilizations, including booze found in the tomb of King Midas. End quote. I always found Patrick's work to be really fascinating and enlightening in terms of the human relationship to alcohol and how alcohol shaped civilizations and agriculture throughout history. So I wanted to give that shout because Patrick's done a lot of really interesting stuff. A not insignificant percentage of modern agriculture was shaped by alcohol production, and I learned a lot about that through Patrick's work. I'll link that book in the show notes. Also unrelated, the Kentucky Composting Conference is coming up in October, on October 9th and 10th. I'm going to join a panel on one of those days, so you can learn more about that in the show notes. Hope to see you all there to spread composting and compost access in Kentucky and surrounding areas. Got another theme song in yesterday, which we will get to you in the coming days, probably not tomorrow, but maybe Thursday. And keep those coming all month long. They've been so much fun. And of course, the 20-second garden videos are always a treat as well. Please keep those coming to farmermike@no-tillgrowers.com. Also, if you're wondering why I'm sort of whispering, it's like 5:30 in the morning and everybody's still asleep. So anyway, otherwise, today I thought I would discuss the milpa patch I did this year. Now, to be clear, I'm not an Indigenous American, obviously. So for a long time, I have avoided using this specific milpa / Three Sisters style planting for that reason. But I got a couple questions specifically from some Indigenous growers about their soils for this method of growing this past winter. And I felt like I didn't have a really helpful insight on it. Also, because this is a style of large-scale food production developed here in the Americas with squash, corn, and beans as the centerpiece, I wanted to see some admittedly poor, unceremonial version of it in action. So I decided to try a few different things this year in that vein of planting corn, beans, squash, and sunflowers together just to see what I could learn. So I'll lay out what I did, what I learned, and what I will change for next year because I definitely want to keep learning from this idea. It was one of my favorite areas of the garden all season for just how lush and happy it looked, even when the world around it was turning brown and crispy from the heat and drought, which we had plenty of. First, the milpa patch started with a so-so cover crop that I mowed. Then I hilled up the beds with a rotary plow. Then I tarped it. Hilling it up there, like getting the pathways kind of poured on top of the beds, was probably my first mistake because it brought up too much in the way of weed seeds, even with the tarping. So that was a little bit of a battle to just keep it under control. But anyway, after a few weeks of tarping, I sowed beans, sunflowers, and popcorn in the same row at the same time with the corn primed, so soaked, so it would germinate and grow faster, which for the corn that I had, the popcorn, it worked pretty well. I used a mix of beans, not knowing which would do best. Then I started the winter squashes in the trays around the same time. When they were ready, I planted them between the beds of popcorn, beans, and sunflowers. Now, traditionally, some growers will do these in mounds. Others will do them in rows. Some will sow specific crops at specific times, but the timing and the style I used was honestly more just about fitting these into my current system that I already use, the 48-inch beds. The beans and sunflowers did not overly outrun the corn, though I would consider planting the sunflowers maybe like a week later if I was going to change anything because they were definitely the most aggressive of the three. Also, when I do this again, I will probably not plant so many different varieties of squash. I got like 5, I think. 1 or 2 is probably plenty. The crops also, all of them probably needed a bit more fertility and more spacing. The squash, the corn, the beans, all of it. Everything turned out just a bit small, even for a honey nut squash, which is generally a handful-sized squash anyway, but it was probably like 3/4 of its normal size. And a lot of that probably, honestly, was just moisture. But I liked the insect interactions in this patch. I liked the lack of pests and disease. I liked the shade, and I think the squash liked that too. It could have used some water at times. Like I said, for sure, it wasn't immune to the drought entirely. It just looked a lot better. And in that way, it did the best of any of our dry farmed areas through August, where we got almost no rain. Harvest was relatively slow for sure, and the beans did not do as well as I would have liked. So again, I think everything would have done bit better with more fertility. Rain, obviously, we'll take more of that, and perhaps if it was planted a touch less densely. That said, it did feel like a success. Of course, there is no surprise here that it would be productive, and will be more so with some tweaking. This style of agriculture fed millions of indigenous Americans over thousands of years, but it was cool to finally get some, albeit incomplete, insight on it. I hope to keep working on this idea for our specific context over the coming years. I went ahead and sowed the same plot to a cover crop this week, and we'll alternate the beds again next year in the same area before moving the milpa to a different patch in the future to allow this patch to maybe fallow for a year under cover crop. Anyway, we'll keep you all updated if you want to hear about it. But for me, this is just about gaining experience, but I'm also excited to enjoy some popcorn and pumpkin this fall, maybe even at the same time. I mean, as the saying goes, if it grows together, it goes together. I'm not sure how I'm going to work the beans into that pairing. Anyway, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, too much organic matter? BRB.
Farmer Claire Coleman here from the Winter Growers Podcast. Did you know that I also founded Real Farmer Care, a nonprofit that supports farmer well-being? From my own experiences farming, I knew firsthand that this type of support was missing from ag, so I decided to do something about it. As of today, there are over 500 farmer recipients of a $100 self-care award, with more applying daily. If you'd like to help, each $100 donated supports one new farmer. Visit realfarmercare.com to donate and learn more. Again, that's realfarmercare.com.
If you, the listener or viewer, are enjoying this podcast, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere the questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes to us from Patreon member Chloe, who writes, quote, "Hi, Jesse. Absolutely love your work," with a little star. That's fun. "I'm 28 and bought my first house in northern Quebec 4B 5 months ago. Congrats. A dream come true. Did a soil test when I started working the garden, and it came back interesting. Aside from the boron deficiency, which I tried fixing with borax, we'll see how that helps. The analysis suggested that my soil's sandy type has too much organic matter, 11%, and the recommendation was to not use compost for a while and just fertilize using concentrates and make sure the nutrients were bioavailable. Now, my garden's been doing okay, but the bare soil makes me sad. How would you approach this?" End quote. And all right, if your ears perked up listening to that, like mine did when I read it, you probably wanted to know what I wanted to know. So I asked a follow-up of how deep the soil sample was dug, because there's an important factor in all this, which is the organic matter on the soil surface, which can skew results. Chloe said they dug about 8 inches deep, but, quote, "It's very possible that some of the soil on the top fell into my samples. I figured it would average out, but it hadn't occurred to me that all this might affect the percent organic matter," end quote. Okay, so great stuff here, Chloe. Thank you. And it brings up a couple interesting topics: too much organic matter and soil sampling for helpful results. All right, so in terms of soil samples, especially when compost mulches are used, which I don't know if they were here, or when you're breaking into a new garden and you have all that residue on the top, all the sod, the results can be quite skewed if the compost or the surface, sod or whatever, all that material on the top is mixed in with the native soil. Why does it matter? Well, maybe it doesn't, but if you're trying to build soil organic matter deeper into the soil, like in the native soil, then you want to have a consistent baseline to be able to measure that and work from. In other words, if an arbitrary amount of compost is falling into the native soil sample, it's going to be hard to tell if the production methods that you're using are actually succeeding. And moreover, you may get an unhelpful recommendation from the agronomist. So to back up, when doing a soil sample, 2 things have to be done. 1, a standard depth and goal must be set, like what are you going for? And 2, a standard procedure must be followed. So for the standard depth and goal for the first 10 years, shoot for like 4 to 8 inches of native soil. Like you want to make sure that that is in your sample. Basically, you want to know what is happening in the rhizosphere, where the bulk of the roots, nutrients, and microbes reside. As for the goal, you want to see the organic matter increasing, the microbial density increasing, and the nutrients staying in reasonable balance. Now, for the second part, the standard procedure, you should do this the same way every year. Go to the same depth, do exactly the same sort of style of sample. Now, my approach is if I have a, like mulch, a compost mulch on the surface, I usually scrape that mulch aside until I see the native soil. Then I take the sample, avoiding the mulch as best I can. Or you could potentially like take the samples with the mulch and expect wildly unrealistic soil organic matter levels, but it will give you a little bit more like what the plant is actually growing in. But my preference is to take the samples without the mulch so that I can see that what I'm doing is or is not working deeper into the soil. Like, am I creating soil organic matter? Is my pH staying in relative balance? Do I have the requisite nutrients available? And because I do the Haney tests, which I will link the interview I did about the Haney tests in the show notes, but because we do the Haney tests more often than any others, I like to see the microbial populations are also increasing. Now, I should say that I'm not a huge soil test person in general. If you can keep the methods and goals standardized, though, they can work really well for you. In general, when people find they have too much organic matter, it's because they are including sod and mulches in the mix, which is why I suggest setting a goal. What do you want to know about your soil and practices? And like, what do you want to keep track of? That way you can not worry about the mulch on top and just look deep into the soil to see if the plants you are growing are working their roots deep down in there and creating soil organic matter deeper and deeper into the soil, and then microbes, and then bigger and bigger life forms. Can you have too much soil organic matter then? Yes and no. Once the soil saturates, if you inject too much compost, it could be hard to retain moisture, so you will kind of know that without a soil test. But ultimately, once the soil saturates, gets full, it will start putting that carbon into other things, microbes, bugs, eventually birds. I always say this, but when America was managed exclusively by the indigenous populations, the soils were extremely healthy, but they were not likely operating at absurd soil organic matter levels of like 15, 20%. They were reasonable, high by our standards, but reasonable in that 8 to 10% range. But when the soil filled up with that soil organic matter, when it kind of became what we call saturated, the biodiversity bloomed. The soil put its excess carbon into life. This place was rich and abundant before colonization in a way that is really hard to wrap one's brain around. Birds enough to block out the suns, rivers teeming with fish and life. That level of carbon is what we're all after. Not soil organic matter levels that could win in the state fair, but levels that make the life around us blossom. If you get to the point that your agronomists are telling you that to use liquids instead of compost 10 or 12 inches into the soil, well, that would be a massive success. And then you should probably just keep doing what you're doing. Anyway, let me know your all's thoughts. Otherwise, we're going to take a quick break. And when we return, we're going to get your garden back in shape for next season. Best we can. Be right back. Today's episode of the Growers Daily is brought to you by Farmhand. Farmhand is the virtual assistant built for farmers, helping CSAs scale sales, run error-free fulfillment, and deliver 5-star service. Whether you're at 100 members or 1,000, Farmhand helps you grow without burning out. You've heard us and our farmers right here on Growers Daily. Explore farmer wins and learn more at farmhand.partners/no-till. That's farmhand.partners/no-till. All right, back to the show. All right, so I've kind of talked about this recently, but I know, at least for some of you, May was super hopeful and glorious, but by July, that hope was gone, like literally buried in some weeds, beneath some grasses or bindweeds or amaranths or whatever. So you mowed it or you gave up, and now you're looking at basically the same thing that you started with, like a field of weeds or grasses. Now, you want to reclaim it, you want to try again, but maybe this time it's a little bit worse because there's weed seeds and perennial grasses and that sort of stuff have reestablished themselves, so what to do? All right, well, the first thing is to try and take stock of the weeds, like what weeds we're dealing with here. Was it annuals like spiny amaranth, which are painful but manageable within a season, or was it perennials like Johnson grass or Bermuda grass that took over and decided to pop a squat? Because perennial weeds can be a little bit more difficult than your annual weeds. If it was mostly summer annuals like amaranths or lamb's quarters or something along those lines that don't survive the winter but do put down a lot of weed seeds, then this is a problem with one of 3 solutions. The first solution is mulch. Neither of those plants that I mentioned, but most of those sort of annual weeds appreciate being mulched, which is good for you. That mulch can be whatever makes sense in your context and for the crops that you grow. But if you mulch over top of them really well and do not expose the soil again, they will not be so much of a problem. If mulch is not an option, though, then stale seed bedding is probably going to be your best option. That is prepping those beds again in the spring, however you plan to do that, and then not planting anything. Soak the beds, get them to germinate, cultivate the weed seeds, and then possibly repeat that process again if need be. Amaranths in particular are very shallow germinators, so any disturbance can bring up a fresh flush. Tarpon can help with either, but I find it's most effective at speeding up the stale seed bedding process. tarp to get them to germinate earlier, cultivate them out, tarp again, repeat. Then you will still have to cultivate those beds well, throughout the course of the season. Of course, if you can leave a tarp on there through the first relatively hot month, which for us is usually May, that can also help. But if you're trying to get away from plastic and get into the garden a little bit earlier, stale seed bedding will be the best option. Now, the perennial weed takeover is just going to be more complicated if that is what you're dealing with. I've talked about bindweed and Johnson grass recently already, and I've mentioned how Johnson grass does not do well under compost mulch, but loves hay and straw mulches. Bindweed cares not about which mulch you use. It's good with whatever. It's happy. Bermuda grass is similar to Johnson grass in that a good compost mulch can greatly diminish its growth, at least in my experience, whereas other mulches may not be as effective. In fact, I've got a question coming up soon from a Patreon member about non-plastic options for these. But like I said last week, most growers use a full year of tarping to get bindweed under control. There are other options, but they are just as long-term and more intensive. Something like thistle will likely need the same sort of level of commitment long-term. In these cases, if it's me, I'm going to prep the garden like it's a brand new plot of ground and tarp it until at least mid or late summer, then plant a fall cover crop followed by a winter-killed cover crop. That should get most of it in check, and then have the beds ready and happy by the spring. You will just have to remain vigilant so it doesn't happen again. In the short term, if your garden is ever just getting lost, just mow it down so you don't end up with the weed seed trouble on top of, any sort of perennial roots or whatever. Anyway, let me know your specific scenarios with all this, and maybe we can tackle a few on Friday. Otherwise, I think we're done here for this Till Tuesday. But before we go, we're going to take a quick word from our friends at Rimmel Greenhouse Systems. Whether you're growing tomatoes for market, flowers in the spring, or vegetables for your family, growing in a high tunnel protected from the weather provides the right environment for a harvest you can count on. Rimmel greenhouses are strong, durable, and easy to assemble, offering the quality you need to grow productively year-round. The team of experts at Rimmel Greenhouse Systems will be your trusted partners to ensure you get exceptional value from your greenhouse or high tunnel investment. Visit Rimmel.com today to get growing. Don't forget, No Till Growers is now officially a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. You can learn more about how to do that in the show notes. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That's an easy way to help us out. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor the show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at notillgrowers.com. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music and Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a hat like this one, or a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, at notillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of September, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to no new signups or bump ups yesterday. That is, in fact, 2 Tuesdays in a row. That makes me feel like I just need to up my Mondays game. So that's on me. But anyway, thanks as always for listening and or watching. We will hopefully get back to our referee, Daisy, tomorrow and see what they're up to, what happened to Coach Rusty. I don't know yet. We'll find out. Have a great rest of your day, you all. Bye.